I used to think I was an introvert for a lot of my life. I wasn't really the type to really go out there and talk to people. And I think sort of the reason for it is because I never really hanged out with a lot of friends throughout elementary school, middle school, high school. I certainly hanged out a lot more, especially senior year once I got my car. But throughout most of my childhood, I never like really hanged out with like my friends from school that much. It wasn't until like I believe freshman year that I started hanging out more, but it was still sort of like a oh I was like I would be talkative with my friends, but or classmates, but when it came to strangers, like I just didn't really say anything because I didn't want to talk. And I thought that was the case with myself, that I was like an introvert, or maybe not an introvert, but like I would only talk to people who I'm familiar with, that I had some connection to, versus someone who's just walking um the opposite path of me, for example, right? And I used to think that up until I entered university and I went to the University of Texas in Dallas. Now, that university isn't exactly well known for social life. It has a bunch of commuters who, they go to class, maybe they stay for a little bit, but then they just go home, right? They don't really hang out at the university. The university is sort of unique because it's not like mixed in with a city, right? Like the UTD is just in Richardson. It's in some random suburb, not out in the middle of nowhere, but because you can take like a 30-minute drive to Dallas if you wanted to hang out in the city, but it's not in Dallas. It's not mixed into the city. Like you can tell when you're on campus, even if there's no flags, for example. And overall, it's not really well known for having a good social life at all. But when I entered UTD, I began thinking like maybe I am more extroverted than I realized, but I just didn't have, but I just thought I wasn't extroverted, or maybe not even extroverted, but just like I realized that I wanted to talk to more people a lot more. During orientation, I remember the speaker, she was like, "Oh, to my extroverts, talk to 5 people, and if you're introverted, just talk to at least one person." And I thought, "Oh yeah, maybe I'll talk to like 2, 3 people, like a solid amount of friends, to like a solid amount of people." But I ended up talking to, I think, like 10 people that day, that orientation. Now, to be fair, it was a bit easier because there was someone who I knew from since middle school, so maybe it was a bit easier because I knew him. But even then, me and him split paths like halfway through, and I began talking to a lot more people, and we bonded pretty easily over like the most smallest stuff. For example, right? Like there, some friends, they were from you know Amarillo. Some one person I knew who was from Austin, right? And I just talked with them, and I just felt like it almost felt like I knew them, even though like it was our first day seeing each other at all, right? And I remember the second day of orientation when I was waiting to sign up for my classes. There's this person who I was familiar with, but like we didn't talk to each other like that much. But me and her, we talked for like I think like an hour, and it was an hour about there's some small talking in there, like UTD itself and like the weather and all that stuff. But we began talking somewhat deep topics about like you know what is it we want to do in life, what is it we, for example, want to achieve. And she said, and I remember her, and like we haven't talked in months, unfortunately, but I do remember our conversation. She was like, oh yeah, she was going to potentially commute 2 hours away, and actually 2 hours to and back. So in total, it would be like 4 hours, which is like crazy to me. But luckily, she was able to get a dorm, and like she can live on campus, and she doesn't have to commute 2 hours to and back. And I just remember hearing that, and I was like, dude, like I hope you get a dorm, and she ended up getting a dorm. And I think, and maybe it's because it's university and not like high school. Because when you're in high school, you sort of are familiar with like most people there because you live in the same, because you live in the same town. Most people, right? If you go to a town, if you go to a school in the town, usually most people who go to that school are also from the town, right? When it comes to university, it's a very very different story, right? I remember like again, I said this person I knew from Amarillo is a person I knew from Austin, another guy I knew from Oklahoma, for example. Like you meet like a very very diverse crowd of people in university, and I think UTD especially, you can definitely find that. Um, which I think made it, which maybe is kind of why I maybe became a little bit more talkative. Not necessarily extroverted, but I became more talkative. But even then, like I didn't really join many clubs for my freshman year. Like I'm about to finish my freshman year. I've joined one club. Well, technically two, but like one of the like the other one I didn't really like do that much. But I didn't meet any friends through the two clubs I was in at any point. Because I just didn't relate to a lot of them. There wasn't really much I wanted to talk to them about. But most of the friends I've made, I just made because we either had class together or we had orientation together. And it's funny because because when friendships form, when deep friendships form, you kind of just don't exactly remember how it even formed in the first place. Usually, you don't really remember. Like you'll remember the vague environment. Maybe you met in university or maybe you met in this one class. But you don't remember like exactly what ticked that moment of talking to each other, right? Like one of my friends, I met him through my first semester, a coding class and the calculus class. But I don't remember the exact moment where we, just started talking to each other. We just randomly did one day. Like we didn't talk to each other. We didn't know each other. We talked one day, and then boom, all of a sudden we talked to each other. We game together. We enjoyed moments together, and it's sort of weird because you kind of don't because again you don't remember exactly what formed it. You just remember it happened all of a sudden out of nowhere. You know. But even outside of class, even outside of that, I think you should go out there and talk to more people in general, right? And it doesn't and I think it's scary especially for a lot of introverts because you're afraid of like, oh, like what do I say, what am I gonna start the conversation with, what are we gonna you're always thinking, especially if you're overthinking, you think like, oh, like what do I say. I just say just let it flow. Just say a comment, right? Maybe say like the weather's cool, or like the or maybe like UTD is kind of a good place. There was so one day I was studying and I was this guy, he sat right across from me, and he had like a lunch container, or no, it was, I guess, dinner, because it was like 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. But he was eating, and I kind of just made a small comment like, hey, like you should get like one of these like thermal containers, thermal container that like contains the heat well, and you don't have to like microwave it in like a plastic container or a glass container, right? It just retains the heat for you. And then we talked about it, and then eventually I talk about my job as a tutor. We talk about coding. He's a junior. I believe he's a software engineer from. So he's a software engineering major or computer science major, if I remember correctly. He talked about his experience in living in the dorms, what the meal plan was, and all that stuff. And I remember we just talked, and they just started. It simply started with a small comment about his container, right? Like he should get like a thermal container that retains the heat of the food. It was just like some small comment that, like, I could have just let it pass by me. I could have just, hey, just get a throw container and then continue studying. But no, me and him, we talked for, I think, like a solid 40, 50 minutes, and we just talked nonstop. And throughout, and but towards the end of the conversation, he told me about like the hackathons I should join. He told me about all these hackathons, Google, Fidelity, I believe. All these like hackathons that that I wouldn't have known otherwise. I mean, I could have known if I searched it up, but if I hadn't searched it up, I wouldn't have known unless he had told me. And the only reason why he told me any of it was because I talked to him first, and I talked to him first because guess what? I had I made a comment about his container, about how you should get like a food container that retains the heat. And another conversation, that happened the day after. There's this guy who's a senior. I believe he's something pre-law related. I believe because he wants to be a prosecutor. Me and him, he just finished a job interview for his internship, and he thanked me for being quiet because I was just doing my own thing and I didn't say anything, right? And me and him talked for a little bit. He talks about how he wants to be a prosecutor, how the neuroscience at UTD is actually really good, which I've never heard of, but that was new information to me. And to be fair, it wasn't as long as the conversation with him, with the other guy, but we still talked and we had a good conversation overall. You know, especially in university, like I think the pressure is a lot lower. If you're out in public, you're walking down your neighborhood or you're walking down a trail, whatever. Yeah, there's a bit more. There might be a little bit more pressure in a sense because you're not in the same age range. Most likely, you don't have like the same, or maybe not same, but like a similar experience to them. University. Most people, especially if you go to full university, most people are within your age range. There might be some like mid 30s or 40s or whatever, but like most people are going to be within your age range. But honestly, bro, like especially if you're in university, the chance of you coming across that person again, unless you have the same class or you're in the same club, like the chances of you coming across them again are like really low. You know, there's, I believe, 30,000 students at UTD. Like, what are the chances? Like, again, if you have the same class, or you're in the same class, then fair enough. But if you have nothing in common, then like what are they like? Just talk to them. Worst case scenario, maybe it's a bit embarrassing. Maybe they find you a little weird. But I think it's good to talk to people. And honestly, you don't even have to do a lot of talking, in my opinion. I think it's just simply a lot of listening, because a lot of people want to do the talking and they want to be heard. And so if you just give them the opportunity to be heard, to hear their life story, to hear their experience, then they'll appreciate it, and then they'll reciprocate it, and hopefully they'll reciprocate it back to you, and you can talk about your journey and your life. So I think that talking is, as humans, we're social creatures, right? There might be periods, or maybe like specific times where you're not talking as much, you're not really interacting, but talking is just how we're designed. We're meant to be talking. We're a social creature, right? We're designed to talk to each other, to learn from each other, to bond with each other. And I think that if you're an overthinker, or maybe you're more introverted than most other people, you should still give the opportunity to talk to people, and just say, hey, what's up, like, how you doing, and just talk about random stuff. Don't try and plan out the conversation like every step of the way, because the conversation can go anywhere, right? You can talk about this one thing, and then you'll just move on to a completely opposite thing the next second. So just interact more. That's all I can really say. If you interact more, I think it'll enhance your life in a way you wouldn't expect. And who knows? Maybe you might make a new friend. Maybe you'll find a new connection to form with, and I think that's something worth doing.